Step on up, sit down, twist off that bottle top or crack open that can, and welcome to Porch Matters. This is Terry Cagle coming to you from my back porch. Yes sir, yes ma'am, the name of this show is authentic. On Porch Matters, our saying is this: big issues or just a friendly conversation, no topic is off limits. We take pride in being able to talk about anything with each other in an open discussion. Open discussion is one of the only ways to learn. Your perspective could be changed. You could change the perspective of others. Friends and family, welcome back to another episode of Porch Matters. I'm glad you're here. The last 2 weeks have been pretty eventful for me. Last Saturday, me and Stacy went down south of Tuscaloosa to Little Sandy Glass, where we had a glass blowing class. Heather was awesome. I plan on going back with Stacy, her son Xander, and my mother for another class. I'm really curious to see how my mother and Xander do, and will definitely post videos on TikTok. I'll also be taking my computer and a microphone so I can sit down and have a conversation with Heather about glass making. Friday was the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes Day. If you have never seen the movie V for Vendetta, I strongly suggest it. The movie is based off Alan Moore's graphic novel, V for Vendetta. If you are asking what a graphic novel is, check out the archives for an earlier episode. I'd like to read you an excerpt from the movie. Remember, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder, treason, and plot. I know of no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. But what of the man? I know his name was Guy Fawkes, and I know in 1605 he attempted to blow up the House of Parliament. But who was he really? What was he like? We are told to remember the idea, not the man. Because a man can fail. He can be caught. He can be killed and forgotten. But 400 years later, an idea can still change the world. I've witnessed firsthand the power of ideas. I've seen people kill in the name of them, and die defending them. But you cannot kiss an idea, cannot touch it, or hold it. Ideas do not bleed. They do not feel pain. They do not love. And it is not an idea that I miss. It is a man. A man that made me remember the 5th of November. A man that I will never forget. Ideas, no matter how big or small, never die. They just wait on the right people to carry them further or make them come to fruition. Whether it would be something major or a smaller idea like this podcast. Just something for you to think about. Yesterday, me and Stacy went back down to Tuscaloosa to watch my beloved Alabama Crimson Tide play the LSU Tigers. I felt like I needed a blood pressure pill after that one was over. It was definitely an ugly win, but hey, a win's a win, right? Look, I'm roll tide, ride or die to the day I die, but mark my words. If Alabama goes into Jordan-Hare Stadium and plays Auburn the way they played LSU, they are definitely going to get beat, and they're going to deserve to get beat. Hopefully the boys can fix what's going on with the running game and learn how to pick up a delayed blitz. Hopefully our quarterback can learn how to make quick reads when he snaps the ball and stop standing flat-footed. He has 4 seconds to make his reads. Even some of the best offensive lines can't hold blocks longer than 5 or 6. Tonight, I got to watch the season premiere of Yellowstone. That show is some dadgum good storytelling. I love it. I got so caught up in it, I had to stop working on this episode to watch it. Speaking of this episode, on this episode, Scott from the Drive On podcast comes on the porch to talk about his life. What led him into the military, what caused him to get out of the military, and what he is doing now. Without further ado, let's get started. Scott DeLuzio, Drive On podcast. How are you, my friend? Welcome to the porch.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I sure am glad to have you. It's going to be a good show, I believe. How's the weather where you're at?
It's beautiful. We're out here in Arizona, and the weather this time of year, we're in kind of mid late October. It's absolutely beautiful. Once it gets to around this time of year, the heat from the summer's gone, and we now have you know probably 6 months of beautiful weather that we get to look forward to. So, or even more maybe. So, depends on how early the summer wants to start. So we're looking at some great weather coming up here.
So basically, what you're trying to tell me is in Arizona you actually have seasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's hot and cold, so it's not like it's a hot season and then like the cool season where it's not all 4 seasons. We kind of have like a muddy down version of some of the seasons, but it's almost like a light switch going on and off. Like one week it'll be 110 degrees, and then the next week it'll be 80, and it's like, okay, well, I could deal with that.
Well, here in Alabama, we really don't have a fall, winter, or spring. Okay. As far as the season goes, we have summer, which, sometimes it feels like the ninth level of hell. Then, during what most people would call fall or spring, winter starts around 6 a.m., spring starts around 10, summer at 2, and fall usually starts around 4:30. We can get all 4 seasons in one day.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, that's why the flu is so rampant down here. You never know how to dress. You have to walk outside and figure it out, and then go back in and dress appropriately. But
Yeah,
by the time you get done dressing appropriately, the weather's changing.
Yeah, you got to bring half your closet with you, it seems like.
Just about. Yeah, you might as well pack a bag. I mean, really. So I know a little bit about you, but my people listening right now might not know you from Adam. Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I host a podcast. You briefly mentioned that earlier, Drive On Podcast, and it's focused on military veterans, their families, and people connected with them. And I started that podcast a couple of years ago to um, to kind of address some of the issues that were not being addressed with the veterans that are out there. There's so many issues: mental health issues, homelessness, substance abuse, all these things that they're being addressed in one way or another. But when you look at some of the statistics, there's just so much that needs to be done. And I said, I don't want to sit around waiting for a phone call saying that another one of my buddies that I served with over in Afghanistan, took their life or whatever. So I wanted to do something, be proactive about it. So I started the podcast as a way to reach as many people as I possibly could. I served in Afghanistan, like I said, back in 2010. And I was over there with my brother. He served as well. We were both in the Army. He was in the Vermont Army National Guard. I was in the Connecticut Army National Guard. Our whole brigade, we fell under the same brigade. We all went over to Afghanistan in 2010, and he was tragically killed over there. And so I wrote a book called Surviving Son about my experience, not only in the Army, but the experience about losing a loved one, and coming back home, and how I dealt with everything coming back home, and all the bad mistakes that I made, and how I eventually tried to figure it out. And so I wrote that book trying to help a bunch of other people, including myself. It was a therapeutic process writing that book, but also wanted to help some other people who might be going through their own loss or their own grieving process or whatever. So I wanted that book out there, and also as a way to tell my brother's story. Since he's no longer here to tell that story, I wanted to be able to tell it for him. And so that's kind of my background and what I've been up to, in terms of my podcast and my book. But those are kind of like the big things. I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of that.
You said a lot there that we need to unpack. Let's backtrack just a little bit.
Sure.
What was the driving force that got you and your brother to serve?
Yeah. So, I mean, my brother and I, we both grew up in a very patriotic family. I mean, that was like growing up, we didn't have like Superman or anything like that as the heroes that we were looking up to. We looked at the people who were in the military or, first responders and things like that. Like those were our like superheroes growing up. And I remember we went to an Air Force base right after Desert Storm, and we were greeting the troops coming back home, and like we were on cloud nine. Like we had our like junior camouflage outfits, that we were wearing, and it was just like the greatest experience being able to see some of these guys and women come home from overseas, and it was just really incredible. So after 9/11, I was in college at the time during 9/11, and I considered just dropping out of college at that point and just joining the Army because I knew there was going to be some sort of military response, and I think like a lot of other Americans that pissed me off, and I wanted to be a part of whatever the response was going to be. But I slept on that decision, and I decided, I'm already far enough along in my college education. I'll stick with it until I graduate. And if there's still something going on, I'll reconsider my decision after I get out of college. So I stayed in, graduated. And then the year that I graduated college, my brother started going to college at a military college up in Vermont called Norwich University. And he ended up joining the National Guard up there as well. He didn't have to as part of like going to that school or anything. He met a friend and he learned more about it. This friend being in the National Guard, he learned more about it and he decided, this is the right thing for me. So he decided to join. And of course, growing up in this patriotic family, I was, just so happy that my brother made that kind of decision. Serving our country is always a great and noble cause. And
Absolutely.
And now my little brother became this guy that like I could look up to, like all growing up, he was always my little brother. And of course he had some accomplishments of his own, throughout his life. But, but now I was like, oh my gosh, this is now one of those people that I used to look up to, as a kid. And here he is wearing a uniform and everything. And I was just so damn proud of him. And then about a year later, I was watching the news and they had this report saying that the Army was struggling to meet their recruiting numbers for the first time, in quite a while. They just weren't meeting their recruiting numbers, and that just got under my skin and it pissed me off. I said, where were all these people from, back on September 12th, 2001, who were ready to move mountains to go get this enemy who was attacking us? Like, where are all those people? And then I had a good long hard look in the mirror. And I said, well, I am those people. Like I was that same type of person. And so I said, well, I'm young enough. I was in my mid-20s. I'm fit enough. I wasn't in the best shape, but I could get by.
Right.
And I didn't have any major health issues, and why not me? So I said, you know what, if my little brother can do it, of course I can do it. In no way I'm going to let my little brother one up me on that.
No,
so
you can't do that.
No, exactly. So I said, you know what, I'm going to do it too. The Army, the country needs people who are willing and able to do it. And I certainly was. And so I just signed up. I went down to a local recruiter, in the next town over, and just signed up. And I had some paperwork and stuff that I had to do, but it was the easiest sell that I think this recruiter ever had, because I just walked in and I said, where do I sign?
Where'd you do basic at?
So my brother and I both went to Fort Benning in Georgia. We were both infantry, so that's where all the infantry soldiers get trained. Do your basic training and then your advanced individual training down there as well. And it's all part of like the same group of guys who go through this unit. I say guys because back then it was only guys in the infantry. There were no ladies back then. I'm sure that's a little bit different now. I know things have changed somewhat, but back then it was just the guys. It was very rare to see a woman anywhere around that area, other than like in the chow hall serving food and stuff like that.
Right. Where was you first deployed?
Yeah, so so after I got back from basic training, so being in the National Guard, for anyone who's unfamiliar with that, we just train 1 week in a month and 2 weeks out of the year. So we all had civilian jobs, and we all came back, and we just did our civilian job and went to training when needed. Occasionally, if there was a state emergency or something like that, or things like that was in the news, like the inauguration back earlier this year, where the National Guard gets deployed, within the country for various things. We could have been called up for stuff like that as well. But my first deployment was to Afghanistan, and that was in 2010, which was actually towards the end of my enlistment. And it was also at the end of my brother's enlistment as well. He actually would have had his enlistment end while he was in Afghanistan. So they weren't going to send him. He had previously been to Iraq, but they weren't going to send him to Afghanistan unless he reenlisted, because they didn't want to have him have his contract end while he was overseas. So he had a close enough bond with the guys that he served with in Iraq and the new guys that came into the unit since then. And so he decided to reenlist so that he could go overseas with them. And so that was his second deployment, my first to Afghanistan back in 2010.
I don't want to give away too much of your book and too much of your story, but
sure.
How did your brother's accident affect you as far as your military service?
Yeah, so it was just devastating to me.
Understandably so.
When we were in Afghanistan, his unit actually, what had happened was he was out on a mission, and they walked into an ambush, and as they were taking fire, they ran for cover, as best they could with the terrain that they had available to them.
Right.
And he went to go call back to some guys behind him. And as he was about to start speaking, his head just kind of jerked back, and he slumped over, and so that's how he was killed by the Taliban over there. And after I came home, it just none of what I was doing anymore seemed like it mattered. I just kind of lost the interest in what I was doing, and just couldn't see the big picture with some of the training that we would do. We'd go out for the weekend, and we'd just be sleeping out in the woods and running around like idiots, shooting our blanks and doing all the training and everything like that. But
right.
like I didn't see the point anymore. It just didn't seem to matter to me. And it was hard. It was hard for me to really stay focused and everything. And on top of that, I had injured myself in Afghanistan. I needed knee surgery. And so I was going to be out of commission for 6 to 8 months or so, where I just wouldn't be able to do the training. And so,
did you tear your ACL or something?
It was my ACL, but there was there's something inside of, like, kind of near your knee, where it as a kid, like, babies aren't born with kneecaps, and so it helps your kneecap form as you're developing, and you don't need it anymore. Right. But I had fallen, and it had knocked that thing out of place, and every step I took, it was like digging into the muscle, and so it just okay. was super painful for me. Like, I couldn't run, I couldn't carry heavy loads, I couldn't do anything, and so that thing had to be removed so that it wasn't causing me pain anymore. But that whole healing process was at least 6 months. And so I would go into training, and I'd just sit there and watch everyone else run around doing everything. And I couldn't do anything.
Because you couldn't do anything.
Right. And I felt completely useless, on top of the fact that I just didn't see the point in doing it anymore. And so I looked into, ways that I could get discharged before my actual enlistment was up. And I found a thing called the Surviving Sons and Daughters. And that's where the book title Surviving Son came from. And it basically has a provision for people who are in a situation like I was, where my brother was killed in action, and I was able to request a early discharge based on that. And so I decided, it's not like I'm doing anything here anyways. I'm not providing any leadership. I'm not learning anything because I'm not doing anything. So, like, I might as well just hang up my hat and be done with it now.
Right.
And plus, it was taking its toll on my family. Every time I put the uniform back on, they just, you could see, even though I was just going to, an overnight kind of training kind of thing, they they had that little sense of worry, that
They never
they
knew when
knew
your number
something could
was going to
happen.
get called and you was going to get deployed.
For sure. Yeah. Well, there's that. And then, even just a training accident, we shot with,
Absolutely.
live fire and stuff like that as well. And, things happen, or, even equipment could malfunction, whatever,
Right.
things happen. And, so they just had that sense of worry every time. And I just hated seeing that in them all the time. And so, I decided, it was time for me to hang up my hat and call it quits. And so that's what I did. And so I got out, uh, just a few months before I normally would have gotten out anyways. And then I had to focus on myself and get myself better. It was a struggle for me after I came home, dealing with the PTSD and everything that I was dealing with. It was just hard.
Understandable. I know you were just I'm not knocking it at all, but
Yeah.
hear me out. I know you were in the National Guard. I know you went through deployment and everything, but you hear different people in different service in different branches and everything talk about the transition.
Yeah.
How was the transition for you coming out of the National Guard versus someone that might have been coming out of, let's say, the Marines or the Army or anything? Explain
Yeah.
to me and explain to the audience your transition phase coming from active until civilian.
Yeah. So, I mean, for most National Guard soldiers, the transition is pretty easy because we're already working a civilian job in most cases. So there are some active National Guard soldiers where their full-time job is in the National Guard, but for your typical National Guard soldier, you're already working another job, and so really when you get out, all you're doing is just freeing up your weekends in a couple weeks during the year, where you're not going to training. And so
Right.
it is a lot easier. But there is, I came to learn that there is a loss of identity because you identify as a soldier and you
Exactly.
identify or as an airman, depending on, because there's the Air Force and the Army, National Guard. And, you identify that way. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden you don't. And that's it. That is kind of a little bit of a struggle for people to kind of find out, what that new meaning is in their life, or new sense of purpose or belonging. Because you do have a sense of camaraderie with the people that you served with. You make friends, and you are tight with some of those people, especially if you deployed with them. You get really tight with those people, and then all of a sudden you kind of lose that connection and that shared bond, and now you don't have that anymore. And for me, when I said I submitted my paperwork to get that surviving sons and daughters discharge, like anything in the government, it took a little while for that paperwork to get processed because that's the way the government
They
works.
don't get in a hurry unless they're trying to get your tax money.
Right, exactly. There you go. Yeah, there was no money in it for him there. So that paperwork took a couple months to process. And so I knew it was coming, but I didn't know what I would be expecting as soon as that came. And literally what happened was one night I went to bed. I'm still soldier in the National Guard. Next morning I woke up and I get a phone call from my platoon sergeant, and he says, "Hey, your paperwork got processed. You're out." And I was like, "What the hell?" Like, I'm out. Like, I went to bed thinking, okay, I'm still a soldier, and now here I am. Like, what am I? I've lost that sense of belonging to this organization and sense of purpose. And you can kind of equate that, and I think this happens a lot, especially with the active duty soldiers and airmen, Marines, whatever, because a lot of them they join right after high school, and that's the first job they really knew is working in the military, and they may stay in for 20 years, and
Right.
that's all they've known. And then they get out, and they're all of a sudden, okay, what am I now?
Right.
I'm just some guy with 20 years of military experience, but how do I transition and apply that to something else, or find a new sense of purpose in my life. And it's hard for a lot of people to do, to come up with that sense of purpose. And for people who've never served in the military, you think of it like a retirement. Like if you've worked a job for 30, 40, however many years, whatever it is, and you've all of a sudden you get to retirement age and you retire and you're no longer doing that. All those years you were saying, okay, I'm a doctor, or I'm an electrician, or I'm a, whatever, fill in the blank. And now all of a sudden you're not that thing anymore. You still could do the work. You still could go, if you're an electrician, you could still go wire stuff and you could still go figure that stuff out because you know how to do it, but that's not your job anymore. And that's not who you are anymore. And so you've lost that sense of identity. Now you're just, a guy who goes and plays golf, every day or whatever,
Right.
And so, and while that's fine, I'm not knocking people who go and play golf every day. If you can do it, God bless you.
Not at all.
But that it doesn't have like that meaning behind it. It's just kind of killing time almost, and when you get out of the military, it kind of feels the same way. Even if you have something else lined up, like I did, I had a job that I was working as well, but it just wasn't as meaningful. It wasn't serving that bigger purpose. And so one of the things that we talk about on my podcast is this exact topic. And we talk about how do people find that sense of purpose after getting out of the military, and it really falls on, a lot of like what I'm doing now with my podcast and my book. It's really just serving other people, finding someone else that you can serve, like a higher purpose. It doesn't have to be, other service members or whatever. It, could be your church or, a local sports team or, something like that, a little league or, football kind of team or whatever. Go coach that or whatever. Find a purpose that's bigger than yourself, and that will help in that transition.
What you just described, everything to a T. You would be surprised at just how many law enforcement officers, whenever they leave, whenever they do that last call and it's over and they hang that uniform up and then they go home. I know with me, I whenever I called the doors for the jail for the last time to walk out, I felt a 1,000-pound weight. I don't even think that's good enough it felt like Atlas. Let's go with a little Greek mythology where you feel like you're holding the weight of the world. You just feel like you put it down and you're able to take a breath.
Right.
And you actually feel like you're able to relax for just a second, but then you go, oh crap, now what?
Yeah. These hands have been doing something for so long, using that analogy there. They've been doing something for so long. What do they do now?
Exactly. You wore the badge, you wore the uniform, not just wearing it, but embracing what it stood for, embracing the responsibility that came with it. Yeah. Taking pride in doing your job and doing it the best that you could. And now and to the point where it actually became who you were.
Right.
And then you're like, now what do I do? Yeah. You would, everything that you just described, everybody that has took that badge off and did that last call can emphasize what you just said. I can, because I lived it just like you did. You were in military, but I was in law enforcement. So yeah, I went through that identity crisis too. I was to the point, okay, now what do I do? And it was to the point with me where I had to separate, and I've talked about this before in my podcast, where Officer Cagle was this, and this, but Terry was a different guy. It was almost like I had to separate the two.
Right.
And then, but as my time went on, you couldn't tell the difference between the two almost. So yeah, I totally understand where you was coming from right there. Talk to us a little bit about your transition, just a little bit more. After you left, you were working your job. Did you have an easy transition, or was it difficult?
It was difficult when I first got back from Afghanistan. I started working the job that I had before going over there,
Right.
and I came back to that. Job was still there. Everybody that I worked with was great. They were really supportive while I was over there. Sent care packages and all that kind of stuff. Great people that I worked with. But I found after coming back home, I just couldn't relate with them anymore. Like I felt like there was just a connection that was missing. And I still was technically in the National Guard, but I was, I wasn't doing much in terms of the training and stuff. So, for all intents and purposes, I was kind of already out at that point. And I just couldn't relate anymore to those people I used to go out to lunch with and used to joke around with and kind of hang out at a happy hour or whatever. I didn't feel that connection anymore. And
You could be in the middle of a crowded room and feel like the loneliest guy in the world.
And I did. Yeah, exactly. And I would
Me
go
too.
into work and it was hard. It was really hard to do that. And every day it was a struggle to get myself out of bed to go into that job. And I think I only lasted maybe a couple months at that job after I came back. I just had to walk away from it. I couldn't do it anymore. And at the time, my dad, he had a position open at his company that I was able to do, and I was qualified for education wise and all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, what, I'll, if you want me to work for you, I'll work for you and everything. But and that gave me a sense of purpose for a little bit, because I felt like I was helping out my dad. He needed the help, and I was there to help him out. But that only lasted for so long, because the job that I was doing, it really wasn't anything that was fulfilling to me personally. It wasn't the thing that really brought me any kind of sense of fulfillment.
It was a job, and it wasn't a passion.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, my dad, he definitely is passionate about this stuff. And so what he was doing, he was definitely passionate about. And he says all the time that he doesn't work a job. He has something that he loves doing and he gets paid for. And,
right.
But it definitely was not the case for me. And so what I ended up doing was, I just kind of switched to part-time, just so I wasn't leaving him hanging, totally with that job. And I started a business of my own, which kind of led me down the path of entrepreneurship. And I found that I had found a much deeper meaning in what I was doing. I was much more passionate about the stuff that I was doing for myself. And I could see the level of effort that I put into it directly related to what I was getting back out of the business. So, it really was encouraging for me to keep up with that, and it got me going. But then I felt like there still needed to be something more. The job was great. The company I had was great. But I needed something more. And so that's when a couple of years ago, I decided to start this podcast, to really give back to the military community that I love being a part of. And I wanted to really help out people who were struggling, and they might have just been struggling in silence and not saying anything to anyone, because I just figured, oh, well, no one's going to understand where I'm coming from. And that's just not true. There's so many people out there who've probably been in a similar, if not the same situation. And if we can all talk about this stuff and get it out there, maybe we can help each other out. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the podcast.
I like your podcast, and I just want you to know that I do listen.
Appreciate that.
Let's talk about it a little bit. What led you to start it? I know you just touched on it a little bit, but let's do a little bit of a deeper dive on that. How did you actually learn about podcasts? Were you actually a listener of podcasts before, and then just be like, hey, I think I can do it? Because that's basically what happened to me. I told this story on the last episode, how I was a huge wrestling fan, and I heard Stone Cold Steve Austin was doing a podcast, and I was like, what's a podcast? And then that was like back in 2012, and then flash forward, here I am.
Right.
Is your story similar? Was you a Stone
Well,
Cold Steve Austin fan?
no, probably not the same. Probably not the same story as you, but
Right,
um,
right.
I had actually been a guest on a couple podcasts in the past
Okay,
for my work, and so I knew about them enough from the people that had invited me as a guest on the show on their shows, and so I knew a little bit about what went into it, but
right.
I really had no idea. I mean, I didn't know anything about, the microphones or the recording, like the software that you use. I didn't, and how to edit stuff like
Right.
that. I had never done any of that stuff
Yeah.
before. And
This is
so,
the easy part of what we
right,
do. This is the
right. The
this is the
conversation.
fun. This is the easy part, the conversation. That
Right. I love this part. This part
absolutely.
is a breeze. Like
Yeah.
I could do this all day, but then I got to go and edit the stuff. And
Yes.
that's just,
Yeah.
that makes me not want to do it all day,
I don't see how some of these people do it just one shot, one take.
Oh my gosh.
On everything.
Yeah. I mean, I most episodes I'm cutting something out, I'm definitely making some adjustments or whatever. But when I first started, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I had reached out to a couple of my friends who had podcasts who I was on their show in the past.
Right.
And I said, okay, what do I need? I'm starting a podcast. What do I need? And so they gave me a whole list of stuff. Get a decent microphone. You don't have to go spend $1,000 on a microphone, but get something decent. Don't use your, laptop microphone or whatever, get something a little bit better than that. And, they gave me a whole, series of things to get. So, okay, cool. I'll go get them. The first couple episodes that I did, I don't think anyone other than my wife knew that I was even doing a podcast, because I was like, this is such crap. It's going to be garbage. And I don't even know if I'm going to keep doing it. So we'll see. I'll put them out there and see what happens. And then eventually I got up enough confidence. I think it's probably after, I don't know, half a dozen episodes or so. I started posting it to my Facebook page and all these other, groups that I was in and stuff. I started posting some of the episodes, and I started getting people reaching out saying, hey, could I be a guest on your show? I was like, a guest on my show? Why would you want to be a guest on my show? No one listens to it. It's like me and my wife who listens to the show. Like, why do you want to even be on my show? But it was great. I realized after getting a couple guests, just like, we're having a conversation right now. I do that with my guests too. And I didn't have to sit there and come up with topics to talk about or whatever. It's like, let's talk to the guest and figure out, whatever the topic is, that's what it's going to be. And that's fine.
Yeah.
If the person they're an expert in a certain area, cool. We'll talk about that. If they wrote a book, we'll talk about that. If they do something cool, we'll talk about that. And so I was like, that's going to save me a whole lot of time. I don't have to keep coming up with all these topics week after week, So
yeah, I don't know about you, but I listened to Larry King he was doing an interview with somebody, and they were asking him, you're one of the greatest interviewers of all time. How do you do it? He kept it simple. He said, I ask a question, my guest starts talking, and then I base my next questions based off of what they say. We have a conversation. I would rather have conversations. I'm good at conversations. I don't know how to do an interview.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, I'm real. You're real. Let's have a good, authentic, deep dive discussion on whatever, and let's see how it sounds. That's what I'd like to do.
I mean, that's what I do too. I mean, eventually I started doing, because I had a couple episodes where it was like pulling teeth, just trying to get the guest to say anything. And I started just writing down before each episode that I record, just a few notes of things that I want to touch on. So that way, if things really start falling flat and the person's, I don't know, they get nervous or whatever. I don't know why they get nervous, but people sometimes get nervous. But it's like, it's just like we're talking right now, just like one-on-one. Like that's all it is. Why are you getting nervous? There's nothing to be nervous about,
We've all been there.
Yeah.
I know anytime whenever I first started this, when I seen that red light come on, I was like, okay, be real careful on what you say. Don't say the wrong thing, and even even earlier in the episodes of Porch Matters, I was very meticulous. Me and my two co-hosts, we would think of a topic we were going to talk about, and then we'd do research. And I would go down through and make outlines and this, that, and the other, and try to stick to topic. And I was very meticulous with that, and it felt like it turned into a job almost.
Yeah.
There wasn't as much passion. There was still passion, don't get me wrong, and I appreciate everything that was done, and I still love them today. But as far as what I'm doing now versus that felt more like a job than the passion project that it is, because that's what it is. I don't have any sponsorship or anything like that. I'm not drawing a check. This is a hobby and a passion project that I actually fork out money to do.
Same here.
So exactly. So, I mean, I really enjoy what I'm doing, and I'm trying my best to get better every episode, just like you are, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for anyone who's listening who is totally turned off of doing a podcast right now, based on what we were saying,
right?
Don't take this as like, don't take it for, oh, it's so hard, you can't do it, because, I'm 2.5 years into my podcast, and I'm still doing it. It's not like I've quit. Every single week I've put out a new episode, and I've been able to do that, and I still enjoy it. For a time, like you were saying, it did feel like it was becoming a job, but I just learned to do things in a smarter way that made it so that I didn't have to work so hard at it and make it like a job. So, I mean, if you're out there and you have an idea for a podcast, I mean,
do it.
Just do it. I mean, it's
just
not
like the Nike commercial said, just do it.
Just do it. Exactly.
Speaking of your show, what have you got coming up?
Oh, oh my gosh, I have so many episodes. The way I do my podcast, I record episodes well in advance. So I like having a good queue of episodes ready to go. So that way, if I decide to, take a couple weeks off and, just kind of blow it off and not have to do anything with it, I'm not scrambling to get episodes out there. And that way I have a steady stream of content going out. I remember over the summer, I recorded like something like 8 episodes or so in a week. And I was like, hey, I got 2 months of episodes right here, all done in a week. And I can take the rest of the summer off now. I don't have to record anything until September or so again, if I don't want to.
I need to do more of that. The most I've ever done was 3.
Yeah.
But I release bi-weekly. I'll release one. Yeah. Because my schedule is the way it is. It gives me more time to edit and everything like that.
For mine, I try to do one every single week, and I've been successful with that since I started. I haven't missed a week. But if I get out too far, like right now, I have episodes scheduled that we're at the end of, mid October. I have episodes scheduled out through the end of January right now. And like, I found that that's too much, because then you start having guests who are like, okay, I have this event coming up that I want to talk about or whatever. And then we're like, okay, well, that's not coming out until February. So too bad, and that's not fair either. So, I'm trying to scale that back a little bit and find a good balance. So I have enough content that I can take a break if I want to. Life happens, things come up and whatever. I don't have to be right on top of it every single week. Because then that, to me, it feels like it would be more of a job where I'm like, okay, well, I have to scramble and make sure that I have meet this deadline and whatever, and so that's exactly what I'm trying to avoid is making it like a job. This part, like we said before, I enjoy this part, the talking back and forth. So that doesn't feel like a job. So I can record all day and just get all these great conversations in. And so with that said, you were asking about what I have coming up. I have interviews with people who are doing some things for veterans that are really great work that is not the typical like going to the VA kind of thing that you might be thinking about for veterans, like the support that they might be getting. And for example, one of them is a former NFL referee. He's a Fox Sports analyst right now, and he does this thing called Battlefields to Ball Fields. And what it is taking the military people, the people getting off of their military service, who have a passion for sports, whether it's football or baseball or basketball or whatever, you name it, and they're getting them into being an official for those sports, a referee, an umpire, or whatever, and getting them involved in that, because it takes a certain kind of person to referee a game and be able to have a thick enough skin to not let the fans who are being a jerk, really get at you, right?
Absolutely. Especially those moms and dads out there that are very passionate about their son or daughter playing.
Exactly. But they work with people at all levels. So they'll get people in at the, maybe the high school sports level, but they'll work with them to kind of advance them through to the college level. And then I think he said that he even has some people who are at the pro level too for various sports. Nice. And we were talking about before that transition and losing that sense of meaning and purpose and whatever. And if you're doing a job where you're working in a sport that you love, if you love football and you're getting to work all these games and making a, maybe side income, for especially at the high school level, you're not making a ton of money doing that, but you're making some money for that, and then you're really feeling like you have a sense of purpose now, all over again, and so that helps a lot of these people who are just looking for that sense of purpose and meaning, belonging, whatever. And you're not going to find that through the VA. No. You're not going to go there and they'll say, oh, hey, we got this program set up where you can go, be a baseball umpire or whatever. But this organization's out there doing that, and they're helping people get involved with the sports and get through the training and get the equipment that they need and all that kind of stuff. And they're really doing great work for the veterans who are out there. And that's just one example of an episode that we have coming up where it's creative, like innovative solutions that people are coming up with. And it's really great. It combines, the best of both worlds. It combines the discipline and that thick skin that you develop when you're in the military. And it also combines, that person's love for whatever the sport is that they're involved with. So, I'm really excited about some of these things that we have coming out. Some of these episodes that we've talked to people. We have authors who have written books on how to deal with things like PTSD and stuff, and really great conversations are being had, and we're more than just bringing awareness to some of these problems. We're coming up with solutions, and I think that's the real benefit to doing this, is we're having these conversations and then we're coming up with solutions, so that someone who's actually struggling with something, they have actionable steps that they can take, and they can go and try to work on that and get better. Not saying that they have to go and work on it alone, but the first step might be to pick up the phone and call, whatever organization is that we're talking to, and see how they can help.
Outstanding. Where can the listeners find your show? Where can they find you on social media?
Yeah. So, the show could be found at driveonpodcast.com. You can subscribe to it anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Wherever you listen to this podcast, you can probably find it there too. And social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, all at Drive On Podcast. Those are all great places to find all that. And then as far as the book goes, you can check out the book on Amazon. It's in Kindle format, paperback, hardcover, so you can check it out there on Amazon, Surviving Son, and you should be able to find, however you like to read it, you should be able to find it there.
Scott, I appreciate you coming on the porch, and you've got a spot on my porch anytime you want to come back, sir.
I appreciate it, Terry. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Big thanks to Scott DeLuzio for coming onto the porch. Find Drive On Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find his book, Surviving Sun, on Amazon. If you are new to the show and like what you hear, hit that like, subscribe, or follow button and download the episodes in our archives. If this show has been a positive addition to your life, please rate the show and leave a review. Won't take you but a minute, and it really would help the show. Find us on social media by typing Porch Matters Podcast into the search bar. Word of mouth is still the best way of sharing. Pick your favorite episode and share it with at least one person this week. There are a lot of people out there that have never heard of a podcast before. I sure would appreciate it, and I'll see you next time right here on Porch Matters.